Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at this thing here. This is another one of the quads from Awesome. This is the Q95mm micro FPV racing drone. We recently looked at the bigger brother of this thing. That was the Awesome F100. That was a 100mm FPV racing drone. That one was the one with the little aluminium sides on. Very pretty quadcopter and actually performed really nicely. This is a slightly smaller model and slightly more compact and slightly lighter as well. So it should perform a little bit better because it's using the same motors and the same props that we had on that larger F100 model. So let's very quickly go through the specs. It's using 10 amp ESCs, they're BL Heli. It's got an Omnibus F3 flight controller. These are mini boards here, they're 20mm side by side. It's an Omnibus F3 flight controller with an on-screen display at the top. Sadly, they've not wired the on-screen display into the FPV camera or video transmitter, so it's a bit of a shame that that technology is wasted on this model. Has a 600 TVL CMOS camera, which is a 25mW video transmitter with a little dipole antenna as well. And that gives a reasonable image, just like all of these smaller cameras. They're not fantastic, but they're okay for mooching around. The nice thing that this model has that the other one didn't is it also includes the buzzer in this part at the back that also has the LEDs too. So we have two LEDs for orientation, which is great, and we have that buzzer, which in my opinion for smaller quadcopters is really important to have, because if it lands and you're not sure where it came down in the field where you're flying, you flip up your FPV goggles, and if your spotter hasn't done a great job in figuring out where it came down, then the only way of finding it is going to be using that buzzer or just walking around for the next couple of hours desperately trying to find it before the battery gives up. So the wheelbase is actually 95mm. I had a couple of 90 class quads where the wheelbase has been 95mm recently. The 3K carbon fibre frame is about 2mm thick. It's really lightweight, this thing. It's only about 45 grams without the battery. Interesting thing is, whereas the F100 used little screws to keep the props on top of these motors, even though it's using the same motors and same props, they're relying on this model on using a friction fit with the prop and the shaft on the motor to stop the props from flying off. I'm personally not a big fan of that, so I would probably recommend trying to get hold of some little screws that will fit in here to stop those props coming loose, because over time I'm sure they'll start to wear, particularly with all the forces involved in hooping this thing around. Really not sure why they put the 8 screws in the kit for the F100 and completely omitted here as well. There are 10 amp speed controllers in this, so a lot smaller than the F100 too, and the video transmitter itself is a 40 channel FPV transmitter, and that little dipole antenna is only running at 25mW. So I'd recommend, again, if you're going to fly something like this, then get yourself a decent dipole antenna, and I'd probably pair it in a diversity setup with something like the Bandicoot from Menace RC, which is a patch antenna for these kind of little dipole models, and it works brilliantly. So very quickly, let me talk about how it comes in the box. You don't get an awful lot at all, and the manual is nowhere to be seen. As you open up the box, there's the model, and you get the model itself without the props installed. You also get a spare set of props and some prop guards too that can be popped on the bottom to replace the little legs that are there by default. The kit's available in a couple of different versions. This one came with this FlySky receiver. This is an old FlySky receiver, so I wouldn't use this anyway because I don't think this one has failsafe. So I would probably recommend, if you're going to get one of these, order the receiver that you want separately. I'm using a little FrSky XM receiver here, which is perfect for the kind of range that I'm going to get out of this thing with a little 25mW FPV camera. And you are going to have to solder it up. The receiver, if you buy it with one, does come separately. So this is not a bind and fly model in my humble opinion. This requires some assembly and some setup too. So very quickly, let me show you how you need to wire it up. This is where you need to connect the 3 wires from the receiver. Again, the lack of manual makes this very exciting to try and figure it out. But so that you don't have to have all the hassle I did trying to figure it out and find the flight controller and get the specs for it, this is where you plug it in. So the 3 wires from your receiver go in here. That's actually UART3. So we have the ground on the right hand side, plus 5 volts in the middle, and on the left hand side you have the S-bus or PPM connection. Behind that is the connection for a Spectrum satellite if you wanted to use that. The setup in Betaflight needed some work as well for this. I tried to get the S-Bus working. In the end, I even got the little receiver tester out to make sure that the S-Bus was working, because whatever I did, the Betaflight version that was on here, and it's a slightly older Betaflight version now, it's quite out of date, wouldn't lock onto S-Bus and stay that way no matter what I tried. And occasionally this does happen with these kind of models. I know a lot of you watching the channel probably think that everything always goes perfectly for me, and most of the time with the right kind of steps you can usually get things working pretty quickly. This is one of those models that didn't want to play at all. So in desperation, I flashed it to the latest version of Betaflight and kept my fingers crossed that it was all going to work after the fact, then configured that up completely, and then wonderfully everything started to work. But as a bind and fly model, we shouldn't have to get the soldering iron out, and you shouldn't have to be flashing Betaflight in order to get this thing in the air. Unfortunately for me, that wasn't the end of the problems either. Taking this thing out to the local field just to have a hack around and just see how it performs and get some FPV footage was a bit of a disaster. It wouldn't initially arm, and then when it did eventually arm, it was just flipping over in the grass. Now, I thought that I had done something wrong, so after playing with it and checking that the props were on the right way, that I haven't done anything stupid, I decided to go back to the bench and check it out in Betaflight in case I'd made a mistake. Checking it out in Betaflight showed some really weird behaviour in the gyroscopes and the accelerometers. So when the model was sat flat and level, the gyros were flicking and moving around, which is never a good sign. Went into some of the gyro frequency settings just to see if I could calm it down, and went through lots and lots of different settings. Unfortunately, just couldn't find anything that would make this little guy perform. So in desperation, turned everything down, went into the back garden to try again, and had exactly the same faults. Initially wouldn't arm at all because it didn't think it was flat. If I could get it to arm, then as soon as I took off, it was getting into trouble and was having to just dump the model by flicking the arm switch back to the off position. So unfortunately, I can't show you any flight footage, I can't show you any FPV footage, and this occasionally does happen. You do get a model where it was made last thing on a Friday before everyone clocked out and went home, and it has a fault, and I think I have a problem here on my flight controller, which is at the root of what's going on. This will go by the side of my desk, and when I'm feeling ambitious, I'll give it another 15 minutes and continue to play around, and who knows, I might end up trying another flight controller in this little thing, seeing if that will perform any better. Other reviewers have had this thing flying and flying very well. It is slightly lighter than the F100 that I really like, so the performance should have been very good. I do like the fact it's a small lightweight design. I like the fact the prop guards are included as well. It means it's going to be quite a versatile flyer. With those prop guards on, you're probably going to be getting towards the weight of the bigger F100 anyway, and it does have the beeper and LEDs at the back, which are essential for flying in long grass, and that's one of the few things that I didn't like about the F100 model. Doesn't have a battery, doesn't have a receiver. You're going to check your prop clearances. On mine, the way that the central piece was mounted that holds the camera was a little bit to one side and could have caught the prop, so make sure that they're all spinning freely before you power it up. It's locked to 25 milliwatt video transmitter with a little dipole antenna, so you're going to need a decent antenna on your FPV goggles. Again, something like the Menace RC Bandicoot would be my recommendation. It's a very good antenna for these little dipole style antennas that you tend to get on these things. But my two takeaways from this are, first of all, that it took a lot of time and effort to try and get this thing to fly in the first place, and then when I got it all together, it wouldn't fly at all. And again, that is my experience, and I might have been really, really unlucky here. But it does show that it happens to everybody, and occasionally you do get a model that has problems. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video, and particularly for watching right to the very end. We try and release a video on Tuesday and Friday, and sometimes we'll release one or two extra ones in a week as well. All of the videos on the channel are organised into easy to use playlists, so do have a look in there, because if you're interested in a subject, we organise all the videos on that subject so you can find them easily all together in one place. If you like what we're doing, then please like and subscribe and tell others about the channel so they can come and join as well. We're available in all of the usual social media places, particularly in places like Instagram, Twitter, and we also share all of our 3D designs on Thingiverse.